Okay, let's be real for a second. For a lot of us, the book of Leviticus is kind of like a speed bump in the Bible. It's just full of these super detailed laws about sacrifices and rules that feel, well, pretty strange and disconnected from our lives. But what if I told you it's not a random list at all? What if it's actually a really profound answer to one of the biggest questions in the entire story of the Bible? See, this is the central problem. The Israelites have just escaped from Egypt, and now God's glorious, powerful presence is literally dwelling in a tent right in the middle of their camp. On one hand, that's amazing. On the other, it's incredibly dangerous. God's pure, intense goodness is like the sun. It's the source of all life, but if you get too close without the right kind of protection, you get incinerated. So Leviticus, it's basically the instruction manual for how to manage this incredible and dangerous relationship. And the key that unlocks this whole book is one single word: holiness. Now, when you and I hear holiness, we usually think it just means being morally perfect. But the original meaning of the word is to be set apart, to be unique. God is holy because he's one of a kind, the source of all reality. So if the Israelites were going to live near this unique, holy God, they had to become holy too, set apart from all the other nations around them. All right, so here's how Leviticus breaks this all down for us. First, we're going to look at how to approach a holy God. Then, we'll dive into the rules of purity for daily life. After that, we'll see how this was supposed to shape their entire community. And finally, we'll talk about the massive stakes involved in all of this. So, first things first. If you're an imperfect person, how in the world do you even begin to approach a perfect, holy God? Where do you start? Well, Leviticus kicks things off with a very specific, highly structured system of rituals and sacrifices. And these weren't just random ceremonies. They were the authorized, safe way to come into God's presence. And, this system makes a ton of sense when you look at it. It wasn't a one-size-fits-all kind of deal. There were different offerings for different reasons. You had a burnt offering that basically said, "I'm sorry and I'm totally devoted to you." You had a grain offering to say, "Thank you for providing for me." And you even had a fellowship offering, which was like a sacred barbecue to celebrate being at peace with God. Each one was a different tool for communicating. And when I say detailed, I mean really detailed. Just take the burnt offering. You had to bring a perfect animal. Then you had to physically lay your hand on its head, which was a powerful symbol. It was like you were transferring your own sin and guilt onto this substitute. The animal's death then stood for your own, and its smoke going up to God represented your life being given back to him. Every single step was just packed with meaning. And they absolutely had to get it right. This wasn't a time for creative expression or just getting close enough. Remember, God's pure, holy presence was literally right there. Treating it casually, even by accident, could have immediate and deadly consequences. We see just how serious this was in a really terrifying story. Two of the head priest's sons, Nadab and Abihu, decided to do things their own way. They waltz into God's presence and offer what the text calls unauthorized fire. The response is instant. Fire flashes out from God's presence and consumes them on the spot. The message could not be any clearer. You approach a holy God on his terms, not your own. Okay, so that's how you approach God in this sacred space. But what about just everyday life? How are you supposed to reflect God's holiness when you're just going about your day? This is where all those famous purity laws come in. And it's so important to get this. These rules weren't about hygiene. They were about your symbolic status. The dietary laws are a perfect example. Ever wonder why a cow was clean but a pig was unclean? Well, it was all about order and categories. To be clean, a land animal had to check two boxes: a completely split hoof, and it had to chew the cud. Animals that blurred the lines, like a pig, which has the hoof but doesn't chew the cud, were considered unclean. It was a daily, tangible lesson in choosing God's vision of order for the world, right there at the dinner table. And this idea of purity and impurity touched everything. It's really important to know, becoming unclean wasn't necessarily sinful. Normal parts of life, like touching a dead body, certain skin diseases, or even the miracle of childbirth would make a person ritually impure. This meant they were temporarily restricted from the sanctuary. It was a constant physical reminder of the fragile boundary between life and death, order and disorder. So why? Why all these rules? Thankfully, we don't have to guess. God says it plainly in the text itself. You must distinguish between the unclean and the clean. Be holy because I am holy. The daily act of making these distinctions was how the people of Israel were supposed to practice and embody God's own character, his holiness, his separateness, his order. Now, this whole idea of holiness wasn't just a private individual thing. The book zooms out to show how the entire nation as a whole was meant to be structured as a holy, set-apart community.
And get this, they even structured time itself around holiness. Their whole calendar was built on a rhythm of sevens. You had the Sabbath on the seventh day. You had annual festivals marking God's work. Then you had a Sabbath year every seventh year where the farmland got to rest. And then the big one. Every 50 years, you get the year of Jubilee. This created a rhythm of life totally unique from all their neighbors.
And we have to stop on the year of Jubilee because it's just incredible. I mean, think about it. It was a complete economic reset button. Every 50 years, all debts were canceled, all slaves were set free, and all ancestral land was returned to its original family. It was this radical system designed to prevent permanent poverty and declare that ultimately the people and the land belong to God, not to creditors. And being holy also meant being ethical. Leviticus is overflowing with laws about social justice, about caring for the poor and the immigrant, about treating your neighbors fairly. It lays out a vision for sexual ethics designed to be completely distinct from the exploitative practices of the Canaanites. To be holy was to be just.
And once again, the book hammers home the reason why. God says, I have set you apart from the nations to be my own. Their entire way of life, their calendar, their economy, their social ethics was meant to be like a living, breathing billboard to the rest of the world, showing everyone what it looked like when a nation actually belonged to the one true God.
So the book has given this huge, detailed blueprint for what it means to be holy, but it doesn't just end there like a technical manual. The final section makes it crystal clear what is at stake. It presents the entire nation with a choice. And the choice could not be more stark. Leviticus 26 basically lays out two paths. Path 1 is obedience to the covenant. If they follow this way of life, it leads to blessing. The rains come on time, the land is peaceful, and most importantly, God's presence stays with them. But path 2 is disobedience. If they ignore this holy calling and just become like all the other nations, it leads to curses, drought, famine, defeat, and ultimately ruin and exile from the very land God gave them.
So when you boil it all down, that's the ultimate point. Leviticus isn't just a book of weird, ancient rules. It's a profound meditation on what it means for imperfect people to live in the presence of a perfect and holy God. It puts a clear choice on the table. Embracing God's holiness, His way of life, leads to blessing and flourishing. But rejecting it leads back to ruin and chaos. Now, this blueprint was given to a specific people at a specific moment in history. But that central idea of being set apart still resonates, doesn't it? It gave them a way to be different from the world around them for a sacred purpose. And that leaves us with a pretty big question to think about. In our world, which is always pushing us to conform and blend in, what might it actually look like to be set apart today?